Yeah. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Sean Devaney with Heavy.com Sports. I'm here with Steve Bulpett, our NBA insider. We're going to talk a little Celtics. We're going to talk a little bit of trade deadline, which is, of course, next Thursday, sort of looming over everything that's going on in the NBA, even with the Celtics. Celtics are 27-25 right now. They're ninth in the Eastern Conference. That would get them in the play-in game, which I think they have higher aspirations than that. It's going to be tough, though, to break through because you've got Charlotte and who they have tonight, and Toronto ahead of them. And I think they could catch those two teams. That still leaves them seventh, though. Bulls, Sixers, Cavs, Heat, Bucks, Nets are the top six. I have a hard time seeing them breaking through against any of those. Do you see any opportunity for the Celtics to get into that top six, avoid a play-in game?
Yeah, I agree that it would be hard, but I think the more important thing for the Celtics is to be playing the kind of basketball that they want to be playing. You know, if you get through the play-in stuff and you are in a best of 7 series, getting home court back is one game. You win one game and you get home court back. Yeah. It's, I think, why, you kind of look at the Lakers and say, okay, for all their issues, if they get in the playoffs and they don't have home court advantage, LeBron goes off one game and they've got it back. So more important is how well they're playing, because if they're not playing the way they're supposed to, the way they want to be, then none of this matters anyway. Yeah. And if they are, then they would have at least a puncher's chance at taking back home court.
Yeah, and even if you're number 7, if you get through the play-in stuff and you're going up in a first-round series against number 2, there's nobody that's invincible. If you get the Bulls, you get the Sixers, you get the Heat, you got to give the Celtics at least a chance in a 7-game series against any of those teams. Even though those teams have been very, very good and the Celtics have had their struggles, when you look at the talent level, when you look at the matchups, you'd have to give the Celtics a chance against any of those guys.
I would, if they're playing to their capabilities. They've shown willingness to move the ball a lot more in the last couple of weeks. Well, actually, since Marcus Smart got back, it's been even more pronounced.
Yeah.
But one of the games they had a real chance to validate what they're doing now was down in Atlanta, and it just fell apart.
Yeah, right.
So that was, they beat Miami, but Miami was, you have to try to judge. You can only play who you're playing. So I'm kind of loath to criticize a win, but they were.
Yeah, especially we've seen them take some wins and convert them into losses. We've seen that. So I think any win you got to look at as a plus.
Yeah, you got to. It's like you've got to be able to finish off. The game Christmas Day in Milwaukee. They didn't just get the big lead on Milwaukee; they earned it, and then they gave it up. It's like, like the coaches always tell you, you've got to finish defensively. You've got to finish off the possession. You can play great defense, but if you don't do something as rudimentary as boxing out, other team gets the offensive rebound. You've got to finish the possession.
Right.
And I think it's the Celtics are in a similar situation where they've played well during games, played really well, and then just they've seen it go away with, some one-on-one basketball, just a failure to move the ball or play with as much pace as they want to play.
Right. We've got some folks joining us. Hi, everybody. I'm Sean Devaney from Heavy.com Sports. We've got Steve Bulpett, our NBA insider here. We've got some questions. We've got one from Picasso Ward, and we'll get to you, Picasso. I wanted to start by talking about Jaylen Brown, though, Steve. Celtics are 11-6 over their last 17 games. Jaylen's played well, 26 points, 7.8 rebounds, 3.5 assists. His shooting has come back up, 47.6 from the field, 37 from the three-point line. So, he's playing more like Jaylen Brown. You put up a piece yesterday, and I want to get into that a little bit with you about what the long-term plan might be with Jaylen Brown. If this does flop out, what are you hearing about that?
Well, I think the Celtics' long-term plan with Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum is to keep them there. If someone called them tomorrow and offered them a ridiculous package for Jaylen, you'd have to make that move, but it would have to be something major. Jaylen Brown's a very good player now. He was an all-star last year and probably would be this year. He still may be, if not for the Celtics record, which is going to hurt him in the eyes of coaches. Ime said the other night that,
Right.
they discount the team. They look at records when they're filling out the all-star ballots for the reserves. And the games he's missed too, I think has hurt him. So this is a guy, but not only that, and as I mentioned in the article, I was getting a couple of calls from two teams that were, like trying to do their diligence on Jaylen. And one of the things I told them was, here's a guy that he's improved. Everything he's had as a quote unquote weakness, he's gotten better on. Free throw shooting, his handles. He still, can make some silly turnovers because he's trying to make a play that maybe isn't there. But here's a guy so not only is he a good player, I guess, to wrap it up, but he's a guy that that the things he hasn't done as well, he's gotten better at. So, it's, I think, fair to infer that, to assume that he will improve from where he is now.
It's interesting that you say that some teams call you and kind of get a temperature on him. Do you have a sense that teams feel like maybe down the road, I think everybody can agree Jaylen Brown's not getting traded on February 10th. But do you have a sense that other teams feel like, well, maybe we got a shot at him in the off season here. Maybe we have a shot at him more around the draft.
Yeah, look. Clearly, I was talking to people about the situation, specifically with Jaylen, but also other teams, and why are they thinking that Jaylen might be available? So that's where the story comes from.
Yeah.
So there's nothing in there that's incorrect. And the fact that other teams are looking at him and wanting to do their work now, like I think one of the coaches said, I wish I had the quote in front of me right now. You got to be prepared if this guy is available, and I think they think there's a chance, but I think that's based on the Celtics not living up to the potential that's there.
Right. So the idea is that if they have another, slightly above 500 season, they get bounced in the first round of the playoffs at some point, whether it's Jaylen, the Celtics, both sides mutually come together, say, we need a change here.
Yeah. I don't think the Celtics as an organization are going to be, I'm certain, from knowing the people, in the front office and in the ownership group, they're not going to be comfortable with being a 500 team. They, and they're not going to be ultra patient unless they see really strong possibilities on the horizon. I think this ownership group has been patient with the Celtics, and they've been rewarded for that. You can say, they haven't achieved what their goals are, which in Boston is, you got to put the banner from the ceiling. But they have, the conference finals appearances, 3 out of 4 years. It certainly spoke of, hey, it's a good team now and has the potential to get better. But if you start backsliding a little bit, the people in ownership groups around the league are people who have won in their professions, and they're going to want to get better, and they're going to want to find ways to get better.
Yeah. Again, I'm Sean Devaney from Heavy.com Sports. This is Steve Bulpett from Heavy.com. He's our NBA insider. And we've been talking a little bit about the Celtics. We did have a question, which I thought was interesting, from Picasso Ward about the Celtics possibly going all in on DeJounte Murray. I think that he'd be a great fit if you could keep both Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. He's the kind of point guard that they could use. 19.6 points, 8.5 rebounds from your point guard position, and 9.1 assists. Not much of a three-point shooter, but I think when you look at today's NBA, you're either going to have a three-point shooter at point guard, or you're going to have a guy who just gets to the cup. And he's a guy who can get to the cup. And I think they need some of that. I think they need somebody to break down the defense, even if he's not a great shooter from the perimeter. I think if they can break down the defense, create space for Jason and Jaylen that way by kind of scrambling, then he would be a great fit. I don't see them giving up Jaylen Brown for him. And I don't see, if you're not going to give up Jaylen Brown for DeJounte Murray, you're not going to get DeJounte Murray.
Yeah, I would agree. It's when you're looking at trades, I think it's interesting. Like, hey, the team A would love to have player X from team B, but you have to look at it from team B's perspective, and finding a fit. Finding something that works for both sides. I think right now you're going to be just hearing a lot of you take my unhappy guy, we'll take your unhappy guy, right. And we'll see if we can make them happier here. Maybe we can be the place. I mean, look, we wrote about the Ben Simmons situation. Was it last week or the week before?
Last week, yeah.
But there's a situation where guys say, okay, I think I'd like to have Ben Simmons, but, do you want to pay that much money for that guy? And he's unhappy in Philadelphia. Is he going to be any happier here? So, that's the kind of stuff that teams are looking at. And I think it's tough. I think that's a little tough to break down.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think if you want to get a guy like Murray, you're looking at sort of that package of picks. When like what the Clippers sent to Oklahoma City for Paul George, where you're pretty much mortgaging your draft for the next 5 years. Yeah. I don't think the Celtics want to do that. I think they've been on the receiving end of that, obviously, with the Nets deal, and they don't want to be on the giving end of that. And you look at teams that have done that; it hasn't necessarily worked out. It's what the Lakers did with Anthony Davis. That hasn't worked out too well. And I mentioned the Paul George thing. So teams that do that do those packages where they give up the next 5 drafts and they have the pick swaps and all that stuff. It just hasn't worked out very much for teams. So I certainly don't see the Celtics being a team that wants to dabble in that sort of thing.
Yeah, and you could look at it from say, well, the Nets are back to being a great team before the Celtics have become that since that trade. But the Nets got there because they had the open slots and because you had Kyrie.
Right, you didn't have to make that trade. Isn't why they're back.
Yeah, whatever weirdness is Kyrie, that's what created the team that's there now.
Yeah,
him convincing them having the space because they were a bad team, Brooklyn, and him convincing Kevin Durant like this is where this is where it is. We should be going.
Yeah. Okay, so this is Steve Bulpett. This is our NBA Insider, Heavy.com. I'm Sean Devaney, also with Heavy.com. We got a couple questions, Steve, that I want to get to before we kind of move on here. Miles asks, and I think this is an interesting one, who would you consider the odd man out amongst Nesmith, Langford, and Pritchard? And do they hold any value? I know you're a big Nesmith fan. He has a hard time getting on the floor, so it seems like he's the odd man out. But I also think if you ask around the league, he probably has as much value or has more value even than Langford and Pritchard, just based on his college days and his reputation.
Yeah, Nesmith has value, but I think people are questioning, because when a shooter loses confidence, it's tough to get it back, unless you're a guy that's playing like the situation with Jason Tatum, where he missed 20 straight 3-pointers. He was going to keep shooting. He was going to keep getting opportunity. In the case of a guy like Nesmith, he clangs 2 threes. He's back on the pine, and he may not see the floor again the rest of that game. But I think what other teams see, and I know other teams see in Nesmith, is a guy that's, a quote unquote shooter who is a very willing and aggressive defender, a very good energy guy, gets to a lot of rebounds and stuff for a smaller guy, and gets to the basket pretty well. He's very willing and able to attack the basket. So yeah, out of those 3 guys, I'm not sure, because I would hesitate to say I would not get rid of Peyton Pritchard under any circumstances. I think he's a guy that needs to be playing more, because one of the biggest Celtics problems is playing too slowly, and he is a pace machine. He will give you pace. It's you got to make sure the guys run with him. But yeah, I wouldn't be thinking about moving him. Langford,
he's definitely not the odd man out. Maybe Langford just based on position, and of course just had to stay healthy. And that's been a real problem. And then like you say, I think Nesmith has the talent, man, but just has had a hard time staying on the floor.
I think they believe in Langford more in terms,
Interesting.
But it's hard to gauge. I mean, if there were moves made that cleared out space, and all of a sudden Aaron Nesmith gets the opportunity to play legit minutes regularly, or any one of those guys, any one of those 3 guys, it could change the perception dramatically. So what we'd say right now to answer that question, with all due apology, is it doesn't mean anything, because it's going to be a situation that changes.
Yeah. And Jack has a question here, kind of interesting. A couple names to put out there on the trade market. One is Portland's Norm Powell. It's had a pretty good year, averaging about 18 points, shooting 40% from the 3-point line. However, just signed a 5-year, $90 million contract that I don't think the Celtics are interested in dabbling in. And also Harrison Barnes from the Kings, who's I think of him as an old guy, I guess, because he was in the finals so many years at a young age. But I think he's only 29, so he's not that old. But it has a couple of years left on his contract. I think he could probably be a better fit. It's only 2 years on the contract. I think he gets something like $18 million this year, and it actually is one of those descending contracts that goes down to 16 the year after. So not a bad contract. Obviously, still a productive guy, veteran guy. However, Jack is asking the question, as a 5th guy in the closing lineup, and. From what I understand, and from what I think you talked to some folks, they're pretty happy with the lineup, at least with that first starting lineup and the one they close with.
Yeah. The question would be, would Harrison Barnes, and they're not exactly the same player, obviously, but would he displace Grant Williams? Because Grant's I'm not saying he's a superior defender, but he's a willing and aggressive defender, and he's got the 3-point capabilities that allow you to spread the floor legitimately when it's late in a game and it's more of a possession for possession game. But Harrison Barnes, it's funny. He has been mentioned with the Celtics for so many times over so many years now that I'm beginning to think he actually has been a Celtic. He might get his number retired.
That's right. That's right. When he was a free agent in 2016, and they went after Durant, that summer. I think a lot of people assumed that he was going to be a fallback option for the Celtics if they didn't get Durant, which they didn't. But they didn't really press for him too hard. That was the summer they got Al Horford.
Yeah.
So I think some of the interest was more on the part of Harrison Barnes and his agent than it was on the Celtics.
But just look around the trade times. It's all Harrison Barnes is one of those guys that it's like he's always, and there's a lot of them, I think. A good player on a bad team, and someone says, "Okay, he's got to be available."
Yeah.
So yeah, again, covering the Celtics over the years, it seems like you're always you're always typing Harrison Barnes' name when you're hearing trade rumors around deadline time, and even in the offseason as well.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind. Look, if they could do Josh Richardson, this is what Jack suggests: Josh Richardson, a young wing, maybe Neesmith, and you give up a first round pick, you get Harrison Barnes. I'm not opposed to that, but it does go back to some of the things that we're always talking about, which is what's the goal of this team? Where does Harrison Barnes get this team as it stands? Does it really make it, a contender? No. Does it get it, even to the Eastern Conference Finals? Probably not there either. So, are you getting Harrison Barnes to get you to the second round? And in that case, is it worth giving up a first round pick for that?
Yeah. And what does it do to you flexibility wise down the line? I mean, this team has got to be, I think it's going to be hard to make moves at this deadline because a lot of what we're talking about is going to be around the league is going to be contract dumping. Yeah. What's the figure that the non-taxpayer teams are going to get the check? Was it 15 million?
It's estimated between 10 and 13 million dollars.
And 13, yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of teams that are looking at that check, and so I think you're going to see some of the player movement's going to be with that in mind. And you're also going to see, I think, a really robust buyout market. I think that's the next thing we're going to be looking at, like the second quote unquote trade season almost.
Yeah.
There's going to be a lot of player acquisition that way as teams try to shed salary, and if they can't do it through trade, they'll do it that way.
Yeah.
So yeah, your point about does Harrison Barnes fix them? Unless if they see that getting Harrison Barnes now opens them up for a corollary move, maybe in the off season, maybe around the draft, then that's possible. But yeah.
That does. And if anybody has questions, by the way, I'm Sean Devaney from Heavy.com Sports. This is Steve Bulpett from Heavy.com, our NBA insider. So if you want to pop in a question, feel free to. We'll be happy to take it. You did bring up a couple things there, Steve, that I want to throw at you before we get out of here. One is the buyout market. Now, would you see the Celtics possibly? They'd have to clear out enough room to be able to cut PJ Dozier, for instance. Who makes that something like $2.5 million, something like that. So they'd have to have enough room under the tax where they could cut him and then sign somebody in the buyout market. So you'd have to, when you talk about trading away, say Dennis Schroeder, and if you could do it into a trade exception, you don't take any money back. Now you probably have enough under to where you could cut Dozier and then sign somebody on the market. Could you see that? Could you see the Celtics taking that tack here in the next couple of weeks?
Yeah, look, we've looked at the Celtics schedule from now till the trade deadline. Tonight's a big game. How well do you play against Charlotte, who's a legit team? How well do you play against Brooklyn just before the deadline? That's a key thing. They should be expected to deal with Detroit and Orlando on the road this weekend. So, when I wrote about the Celtics a couple of weeks ago, I think that the issue of, how well they're doing right now might factor into how patient they want to be, because I know there was a certain point where they were very aggressive, like we need to make moves. Seeing how, I'm not sure they're going to have enough time to feel comfortable about, hey, we need to be buyers here. The heck with getting under the luxury tax. We have an opportunity. Let's go for it. When you point out, as you did, the standings, where they are, where they might want to get to, it's hard to see them rising too hard. But, if they're playing well, perhaps they can be convinced that, hey, we could do something here.
And the other thing that you mentioned too, and this was in your post over at Heavy.com under the Celtics. Do check it out if you're watching. Was this could be an interesting offseason that You talked to at least one executive who said this could be there could be some major shifts this summer. What are you hearing about that?
Well, just that, the Celtics might be happy with what they have as a core and trying to build on it. But you've got to look at, this is the NBA where, players kind of run the show as well. You know what I mean? An unhappy player that wants to be moved is most likely going to get moved. So be interesting to see how that pans out. I think there's some room there that things could get juggled but again, it's going to be how does this year go? Yeah. How does the team? How is their basketball chemistry? I don't think there's an issue with guys on the Celtics having issues with each other personally. I think this team is pretty good in that regard, from what I've seen and what I've been. We're not around the team like we used to be, and certainly I'm not. But I've talked to a number of people that are there inside every day, and that's not the issue. The issue is, are they going to play basketball in a way that maximizes individuals, but also maximizes what they can do as a team. I know we've discussed it before, but you go back to the 2018, Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Finals. Yeah, they've got Cleveland on the floor in Boston. Clear path to the NBA Finals. Right. Getting there without you've got Gordon Hayward out and Kyrie Irving out with injuries, gone, and they should have done it, but they devolved into, and again, it's not necessarily a guy being a jerk. It's like, here, give me the ball. I'm going to take responsibility. I'm going to go make a play. Yeah. And that takes you out of what you want to do as a team. Yeah. And, bad floor balance, all those basketball things come into play. They've got to fix that. And they're still fighting it. The fact that they're still fighting it, in 2021, into this year is, kind of crazy. Yeah. Yeah. It's funny, here we are at the deadline. I remember that year, you probably remember too, it was almost a foregone conclusion at the trade deadline that they were going to trade a first round pick and get either Lou Williams or before, and then the Clippers wound up signing him to an extension and kind of threw a monkey wrench into everybody's plans because everybody assumed that Lou Williams was going to get traded and the Celtics were at the top of the list. Or Tyreek Evans was the other guy. Mm-hmm. And I remember watching that Game 7, like, man, I bet they wish they made one of those trades because they need somebody who can put the ball in the basket right now. It's funny how what happens in February can really affect what happens in June. And the thing is, they were putting it in the basket, playing, the up tempo and off their defense. We'll bring it up again, but it's important to note that Golden State was easily the team to beat then. But when the Warriors were watching the Celtics and Cavaliers play that Game 7, they were rooting for the Cavaliers. They did not want to see Boston. Boston was a much bigger threat to them. And, it to be the fact, and because I'm sure you've talked to a lot of the same people I have within the Warriors, they did not want to see the Celtics. And I think in some ways, the fact that I think the Cavaliers even played below their own capabilities in that series because they knew what was coming. They knew that they were going to go up against the Warriors and it was not going to look good. Right. I think there was some subconscious weirdness in their heads, like, of how that's going to work out. But that would have been, there was a breakthrough opportunity. And I think that, created stuff in the following years for Boston when that didn't work out. And all of a sudden, guys come back from injury and, it's not the same team that got to the conference finals the year before, but they get there, what it's like. Yeah, absolutely. All right, everyone. Well, we're going to wrap up here. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you guys for your questions here on a Wednesday morning. And we'll be back again, certainly before next Thursday's trade deadline. Should be an interesting 8 days. Looking forward to it. And thanks again. We'll talk to you soon.